Hello everyone! In this video, we're embarking on an ascent. We're going beyond the letter of the law to discover what it truly means to have a heart that beats in unison with God's. The image you see here, this sun-kissed peak, is our destination. The old law, the Ten Commandments, was written on tablets of stone. It was a guide, a necessary foundation. But Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, invites us to something more. In Matthew 5:17-37, he wants to write a new law, not on stone, but on the very muscle and fiber of our hearts, our cardia, as the Greeks would say. This isn't about just obeying rules from a distance. It's about ascending the mountain to know and to embody the very spirit of the lawgiver. The new Moses. To understand what Jesus is doing, we have to see him as the new Moses. Look at the contrast here. On Mount Sinai, Moses receives the law from God and descends alone to the people. It's a top-down delivery of rules written on stone. But on the Mount of the Beatitudes, Jesus, who is God, delivers the law himself, and he doesn't descend. He invites his disciples to ascend with him. This is a radical shift. The law is no longer just an external code. It's an internal transformation that happens in relationship with him. That's why he says, "I have come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it." He's not erasing the past. He's revealing its ultimate meaning. Fulfillment, not abolition. So what does this fulfillment look like? I love this analogy of the student versus the virtuoso. A music student, when they're first learning, follows the rules of the sheet music very mechanically. They're focused on not hitting a wrong note. But a virtuoso, a master musician, has so internalized those rules that they can now play with the spirit of the music. The rules haven't been abolished. They've been absorbed into the artist's very being, allowing for freedom and beauty. This is what Jesus does with the law. He isn't destroying the map of the Old Testament. He's showing us the breathtaking destination it was always pointing to. He embodies the law so perfectly that he fulfills every iota and dot, every tiny detail, by revealing its heart, which is love. The Pharisaic trap. This leads us to a stark warning from Jesus. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, we have to understand, the Pharisees were the gold standard of religious observance in their day. They were the ones everyone looked up to. But Jesus saw a trap they had fallen into: legalism. As this image of the tarnished chalice suggests, they were clean on the outside, but their hearts were often dead on the inside. Their righteousness was about external performance. Jesus is calling us to something far more challenging and far more beautiful. He's calling us to move from just looking good to actually being holy. It's an invitation to authenticity, to a faith that is as true on the inside as it appears on the outside. Case study, anger. So let's get practical. Jesus gives us a series of case studies, starting with the commandment, "You shall not murder." He performs what we might call a spiritual autopsy, tracing the act of murder all the way back to its root in the heart. It begins with orge, that smoldering, nurtured grudge we hold on to. This is the seed, the genesis of violence. From there, it can escalate to raka, an insult that strips a person of their God-given dignity. And finally, it can lead to more, calling someone a fool, which is a damning judgment on their very soul's worth. Jesus shows that the penalty for this internal violence escalates, leading all the way to the fire of Gehenna. He's teaching us that sin begins in the heart long before it becomes an action. Mercy before sacrifice. So what is the remedy for this anger festering in the heart? Jesus gives us a clear directive: mercy before sacrifice. He says, "Leave your gift at the altar. First be reconciled." This is a staggering statement. Our worship, our religious obligations, are invalid if our hearts are not right with our brothers and sisters. Any disharmony, any unresolved conflict acts as a barrier between us and God. The path to God's heart runs directly through our neighbors. And notice the practical application here. The burden of peace is on us. We must take the initiative to reconcile, even if we believe we are the ones who were wronged. A disciple of Jesus is always the first one to extend the hand of peace. Case Study 2. Lust. Next, Jesus applies this same interior focus to the commandment against adultery. He says, "Do not look with lust." The shift, once again, is from the external act to the internal cardia, the heart, which the ancients saw as the seat of the will. Jesus isn't condemning natural attraction. Lust is something different. It is the decision to objectify, the choice to see another person not as a subject to be loved, but as an object to be used for our own gratification. This, Jesus says, is the genesis point of adultery. It happens in the heart first. As the quote says, "Virginity is no virtue for those whose hearts are impure." Purity is not about the state of the body, but the state of the soul. Radical surgery. So if the problem is in the heart, how do we fix it? Jesus uses a shocking and powerful metaphor. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Let's be very clear. This is not a command for self-mutilation. It's a call for what we might term spiritual oncology. Just as a surgeon must be ruthless in cutting out a cancerous tumor to save the body, we must be ruthless in cutting out the occasions of sin from our lives. These are the habits, the environments, the relationships, even the digital spaces that consistently lead us to fall. Jesus' point is that we must be willing to part with anything that keeps us from God. It is better, he says, to enter heaven wounded and whole than to enter Gehenna with our bodies intact but our souls lost. Case Study 3. Marriage. Jesus now turns to the covenant of marriage, restoring it to its original beauty. He explains that Moses permitted divorce only because of sclerocardia, a hardness of heart. It was a concession to human brokenness, not God's ideal. Jesus restores God's original blueprint from the book of Genesis. Marriage is a one-flesh union. This is so much more than a legal contract that can be broken. It is a metaphysical reality created by God Himself. It's a bond, a knot tied by God. As Jesus says, quoting Genesis, "What God has joined together, let not man put asunder." He elevates marriage back to its status as a permanent, life-giving covenant. Understanding the exception. Now, people often get confused by the so-called exception clause regarding porneia. It's important we understand this correctly. Porneia refers to sexual immorality or unchastity. This is not a loophole or permission to divorce simply for falling out of love. In the Catholic understanding, this refers to situations that would make a marriage invalid from the start, such as an incestuous union, or to grave sexual sins that fundamentally shatter the marital covenant, like adultery. The reality is that even in cases of legitimate separation, the Church teaches that the spiritual bond of a valid marriage remains. The call is always first and foremost to fidelity, and if possible, to reconciliation, mirroring God's own faithful love for His people. Case Study IV. Oaths. Our final case study deals with oaths and the integrity of our speech. Jesus' command is radical. Do not swear at all. Let your yes be yes. The problem with making oaths is that the very need for them implies a baseline of dishonesty. It suggests that our normal, everyday speech isn't reliable. Furthermore, the practice of trying to invoke spiritual power by swearing on things other than God's name was a form of deception, an attempt to make a binding promise with a built-in escape clause. Jesus calls us to a standard of radical transparency. A Christian's word should be so utterly reliable, so full of integrity, that an oath becomes completely redundant. Our yes should simply mean yes, period. We are called to be people whose inner reality and outward speech are one. The prophecy fulfilled. Everything we've been talking about, this move from the external to the internal, is actually the fulfillment of a great prophecy from Jeremiah. I will put my law within them, and I will write it upon their hearts. This is the absolute core of the new covenant. Jesus is not just giving us a new and harder set of rules. He is fundamentally changing the nature of the rule keeper. He is giving us a new heart. The goal is what the Greeks called teleos, which means perfection, maturity, or completion. The ultimate aim is not just avoiding sin, but through grace, becoming the kind of person who no longer even desires it. It's about our desires being reordered to align with God's. Empowered for greatness. Now, it's easy to hear all this and feel a sense of fear or inadequacy. The bar is too high, we might think. I can't possibly live up to this. But here is the truth of our faith. God does not command the impossible. As the book of Sirach tells us, if you will, you can keep the commandments. God has given us free will, and He empowers that will with His grace. And what about when we fail, because we will? This is where the beautiful safety net of the faith comes in. When we fall, we are not meant to lapse into despair, which is a form of pride. Instead, we are invited to fall backward into the ocean of God's mercy, into grace, which we encounter most powerfully in the sacrament of confession. Sacred chiaroscuro. So where do we get this grace? Where are our hearts rewritten? The answer is found here, in the Mass. The liturgy is the privileged place where we receive the grace to actually live out the Sermon on the Mount. The words of the Mass, Sursum Corda, lift up your hearts, are a direct invitation to this transformation. We are not called to be passive spectators or to just fulfill an obligation. We are called to immerse ourselves in the mystery, in this sacred chiaroscuro of light and shadow, where heaven meets earth. It is here, in the encounter with Christ in the Eucharist, that our stony hearts are made flesh, and the law is written anew within us. Be perfect. Be complete. And so we arrive back at our summit. Be perfect, Jesus says, as your heavenly Father is perfect. We can now understand this not as a command to be flawless, but as a call to be complete, to be teleos, to be mature, to reach the end goal for which we were made. Holiness is not a checklist of don'ts. It is the wholeness of a heart that is completely set apart for God. The journey Jesus invites us on is an ascent up the mountain of our own hearts, to learn to see as He sees, and ultimately, to love as the Father loves. This is our calling. This is our joy. This is the law of the heart. Thank you for viewing. May God bless you abundantly. Amen.